Hello, my name is Olivia Morgan, and I learned the hard way that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who bury the deepest scars. I always thought that loyalty would save me, that if I just worked harder to be a good daughter, my mother would finally see me. But one cold January morning, she proved once and for all that blood isn't thicker than cruelty. I grew up in a town so small you could drive from one end to the other in 10 minutes. Everybody knew each other's business. Everybody knew we were the Morgans, the respectable family with the big house near the beach and the mother who led every charity drive and sat in the front pew at church. What they didn't see was what happened behind closed doors. The manipulation, the silent punishments, the way my mother could shatter your heart with a smile and a few carefully chosen words. I opened a bakery after college, pouring everything I had into it. I named it Olivia's Hearth Bakery because I wanted it to feel like a safe place, the opposite of the house I grew up in. For once, I wasn't under her thumb, or at least I thought I wasn't, but toxic. Families have a way of pulling you back in when you least expect it. The day everything cracked open started innocently enough. I got a call from my younger sister, Vanessa. Her voice trembled through the phone as she told me she was pregnant and scared. She hadn't told Mum yet. She barely told Raphael, her boyfriend. I could hear the fear bleeding through her words. Not fear of motherhood, but fear of what Mum would do when she found out the baby's father wasn't the right kind. Raphael was kind, patient, hardworking, and half Mexican. None of that would matter to Judith Morgan. I drove straight to Vanessa's apartment, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When she opened the door, she looked smaller somehow, like she'd shrunk under the weight of the secret she carried. We sat on her worn-out couch for hours, her hands curled around a chipped coffee mug, as she told me everything. Raphael loved her. He wanted to marry her. But lately, he'd been distant, cold, asking questions he never asked before. Questions about whether the baby was really his. Questions that sounded suspiciously like they had been planted there. I didn't need a detective to figure it out. I knew my mother's fingerprints when I saw them. She said I should get a paternity test. Vanessa whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. She said it's for my own good, that Raphael deserves to know. My heart broke right there in that tiny living room, not because of the tests are reasonable. It was the intent behind it. It wasn't about truth. It was about planting doubt, about control, about making sure my sister couldn't escape the gravitational pull of our mother's toxic orbit. I told Vanessa I'd pay for the DNA test, no strings attached. She cried, full-body sobs of relief. We set it up for the next morning, scheduled the results to be expedited. I thought, maybe, just maybe this was the beginning of our liberation. Maybe this would be the proof Raphael needed to stay. Maybe it would be the final crack in the facade my mother had built around us all. But I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Because a few days later, when the results were supposed to arrive, Vanessa called me again, this time, frantic. The mail came. The results were gone, and the only person who'd picked up the mail that morning was Mum. My hands shook as I gripped the phone, my heartbeat pounded in my ears. This wasn't just betrayal, this was sabotage. A deliberate attempt to destroy Vanessa's future out of nothing but bigotry and pride. I closed my eyes and took a deep, ragged breath. It was in that moment, standing alone in my bakery kitchen, flour dusting the floor, the smell of fresh bread hanging in the air, that I understood something I should have realised years ago. My mother would never stop until she owned every piece of us. And if I wanted to save my sister and myself, I would have to stand up in a way I never had before. This wasn't just about a test. This was about freedom. And this time, I wasn't going to back down. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the same cracked coffee mug I'd used earlier that day, running through every memory I had of my mother, every smile that masked a knife, every hug that felt more like a trap. Somewhere deep down, I realised I had always been waiting for the day she would go too far. And now, here we were. The next morning, I didn't tell Vanessa what I was planning. She was too fragile, too hopeful that somehow things could still be fixed without a fight. I wasn't going to shatter that hope for her. Not yet. I just kissed her forehead, promised her I would take care of everything, and drove straight to the only person I trusted outside our shattered family. My Aunt Clara, lived about 5 miles down the coast in a small white cottage that always smelled like salt and fresh lavender. She'd cut ties with Mum almost 15 years ago, long before I was old enough to understand why. And now, for the first time, I understood her silence. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than any I could remember. I told her everything about Vanessa, about the stolen results, about the quiet, creeping manipulation that had turned our lives into knots we didn't even realize we were tied in. Clara listened, her mouth tightening, her hand gripping the arm of her chair until her knuckles turned white. Then she stood up, grabbed her purse and said, "Let's go fix this." Our first stop was the electronics store. I bought 4 security cameras, small but powerful with cloud backup, in case anyone tried to get clever. Clara paid for half without even blinking. Our second stop was the locksmith. New locks for the bakery, new locks for my house, a P.O. box in my name, where only I had the key. No more open doors, no more vulnerabilities. It took hours to install everything, but by nightfall, my house was a fortress and not a moment too soon, because just after midnight I caught her. The alert buzzed on my phone, waking me up from a restless doze. I rubbed my eyes and clicked open the feed, and there she was. Judith Morgan herself standing on my front porch, peering into my windows like a thief casing a target. In her hand was the missing envelope, now crumpled and torn. I watched heart pounding as she tried the front door, then the side gate. When everything stayed locked, she shoved the envelope through the mail slot and stormed off into the night. The next morning, I found it lying crookedly on the floor, a last-ditch attempt to make herself look innocent. But I wasn't 12 years old anymore. I wasn't scared of bedtime stories and veiled threats. I was done letting her rewrite reality. I called Vanessa first. I told her what I'd seen, gently trying to cushion the blow. She cried. Of course she did, but when she stopped, there was something new in her voice, a quiet steel I hadn't heard before. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We meet Raphael at the diner," I told her. "We open the real results together. We decide what happens next." Not her. The diner was nearly empty when we arrived, the windows fogged up against the cold. Raphael sat at a booth near the back, his hands fidgeting with the napkin dispenser. When he saw Vanessa, his whole face lit up in a way that made my chest ache. He loved her. He just didn't know if he could trust her, and thanks to my mother's poison, he'd been left questioning everything. I slid into the booth, pulled out the sealed envelope, and placed it gently on the table between us. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then Vanessa reached out with trembling fingers, ripped it open, and pulled out the paper. It was positive. 100% Raphael was the father. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound he made. Half laugh, half sob, as he grabbed Vanessa's hands across the table. He kissed her forehead over and over, whispering apologies, promises, dreams of a family that had nothing to do with hate or lies. Then right there in the middle of that greasy spoon diner, with a flickering neon sign and a waitress refilling coffee like clockwork, Raphael dropped to one knee, pulled out a tiny battered ring box he must have been carrying for months. "Marry me," he said. "Let's make something real. Just you and me. No more running, no more fear," Vanessa said yes. She said it 6 times, choking on tears, her voice breaking in the middle of every word. And as I watched them hold each other, the weight of decades of manipulation, betrayal, fear cracked and shattered inside me. We were free, or at least we were about to be, because I knew we all knew. Judith wasn't going to let us go without a fight, but this time, I was ready. We barely had time to breathe in the joy before the next storm hit. When we pulled back into Vanessa's place later that evening, the first thing we saw was the pile. Their belongings, clothes, books, Raphael's work boots dumped carelessly on the frozen lawn, like garbage. A few battered suitcases sat half open, their contents spilling into the slush. For a moment, none of us moved. It was like stepping into a nightmare you thought you'd already woken up from. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled sound escaping her lips. Raphael stiffened beside her, fists clenching and unclenching uselessly at his sides. I felt my stomach turn to stone. We weren't even out of the car yet, and I knew exactly who was responsible. The front door slammed open with a bang, and there she was, Judith Morgan in full self-righteous fury, waving a crumpled sheet of paper in the air like some kind of battle flag. It was the DNA results, the same ones she had stolen, the same ones she now brandished as proof of her betrayal. "You think you can make fools out of me?" she screamed, her voice slicing through the cold air. "You think you can bring that filth into my house, parade around like everything's normal?" The slur she used next was so ugly, it made Vanessa flinch like she'd been struck. Raphael stepped forward instinctively, but I caught his arm. "Not yet. Not like this. You're not welcome here," Mum shrieked, pointing a trembling, furious finger at Vanessa's belly. "That thing inside you is a stain on this family." Vanessa collapsed to her knees in the snow, cradling her stomach as sobs racked her body. Raphael dropped beside her, shielding her as best he could with his own body, watching them so small, so vulnerable against her hatred. Something inside me snapped. I stepped between them and Judith, close enough that I could smell the sour alcohol on her breath. Her face twisted into a mask of rage, and something that almost looked like fear. "You will leave them alone," I said, my voice low and steady. "You will pack whatever soul you have left and walk back into your lonely little house, and you will never come near them again." She laughed, a short, ugly bark of disbelief, and raised her hand like she was about to slap me the way she used to, when I was a child who dared to talk back, but I didn't move. I just stared at her, daring her. For a moment, everything froze. Even the wind seemed to hush, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then slowly, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, she lowered her arm. The fury didn't leave her eyes, but the power had. I saw it. I felt it. For the first time in my life, she knew she couldn't control me anymore. She turned on her heel and stormed back inside, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. We gathered up the scattered pieces of Vanessa and Raphael's life in silence. I loaded their things into the back of my truck, while Raphael helped Vanessa into the cab, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders. She didn't speak. She just held on to him like he was the only solid thing left in a world that had cracked wide open. I put them up in a hotel that night, a small shabby place with threadbare carpets and an old neon vacancy sign that buzzed when the wind blew. It wasn't much, but it was warm, it was safe, and for now that was enough. After I got them settled, I drove back to my own house. It was almost midnight. The sky above the ocean was clear and full of stars, but I barely noticed. My mind was a battlefield, guilt and rage and grief, all fighting for the loudest voice. I sat on the porch steps, staring out into the darkness, replaying every word, every look, every moment of the night. The emotional scars my mother left didn't just disappear because I stood up to her. They throbbed, fresh and raw, aching in places even I hadn't known were wounded. But there was something else too, a strange, quiet strength I hadn't felt before, a kind of battered, bloody pride. I had stood up. I had protected my sister when it mattered most. For the first time in my life, I hadn't backed down. This wasn't just about liberation from a toxic family anymore. This was about building something new from the ashes, a life rooted in truth, not fear. Inside my house, the cameras hummed quietly, recording the locks were bolted. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to be alone. We had survived the first battle, but I knew deep down that Judith wasn't finished. Not yet. The real war was just beginning. The next few days passed in a tense, uneasy quiet, like the heavy stillness before a tornado. Vanessa and Raphael stayed at the hotel, trying to piece together some kind of plan for their future. I visited them every morning with coffee and warm croissants from my bakery, pretending everything was normal, pretending that we weren't all just waiting for Judith to make her next move. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. I was restocking the shelves when my phone buzzed with a security alert. Motion detected. I tapped the screen and froze. There she was, Judith Morgan, standing on my front lawn, a bucket in each hand, her face twisted into something that barely resembled the woman I had once called Mum. Before I could even process what I was seeing, she swung one of the buckets high, and with a crash, a rock smashed through the front window. Another rock followed, and another, each one scrawled with hateful slurs in thick black marker. Words I hadn't seen since childhood, scrawled on bathroom stalls and whispered in hallways. Words meant to wound, to shame, to poison everything they touched. I bolted for the door, adrenaline crashing through my system. By the time I got home, barely 5 minutes later, she was gone. The windows were shattered, shards of glass glittering in the sunlight like cruel little stars. The porch was littered with rocks, each one a venomous message. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood there breathing in the broken air, feeling something inside me harden like cooling steel. I pulled up the security footage, saved it to a flash drive, and called the police. The officer who arrived was kind, professional. He watched the footage in silence, then nodded and said, "We'll take it from here, Mum." He didn't look at me like I was crazy. He didn't ask if I was sure. He just believed me, something I hadn't realised I was desperate for until it happened. By sunset, I had filed a restraining order. Judith Morgan was no longer allowed within 500 feet of me, my house or my bakery. It should have felt like victory, but standing there in the ruins of my living room, all I felt was exhausted. That night, Raphael and Vanessa came over to help me clean up. We picked up the glass, swept the porch, replaced the broken panes with sheets of plywood. It was hard work, tedious and dirty, but somehow healing. Every sweep of the broom felt like reclaiming something, a piece of space, a piece of peace. Afterward, we sat on the floor eating cheap takeout by the dim light of a single surviving lamp. Vanessa leaned her head against Raphael's shoulder, her hand resting gently on her growing belly. They looked tired, but they also looked like hope. "I'm sorry," she whispered once, so soft I almost missed it. "For what?" I asked, genuinely confused for not seeing it sooner. For letting her make me into something I'm not. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're here now." I said, "That's what matters." Outside, the ocean roared softly in the distance, steady and eternal. The news travelled fast in our small town. Within days, people started whispering, some in sympathy, some in judgment. But the footage from my dash cam, which captured every hateful word Judith had spewed the night she kicked Vanessa out, made its way through the community like wildfire. I didn't post it publicly. I didn't have to. Family talked. Neighbours listened. The truth had a way of finding its own voice. Judith's carefully crafted image as the benevolent church lady crumbled almost overnight. Some of her friends stopped calling. Some of the clients who rented her little seaside Airbnb left scathing reviews mentioning hostility and an uncomfortable atmosphere. I heard whispers that her bookings dried up almost completely. I didn't rejoice. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't satisfying. It just was. I focused on rebuilding. Not just the windows or the bakery or the walls around my home, but the life I had always wanted to live. A life without fear. A life without manipulation. A life where love wasn't conditional and standing up for yourself wasn't seen as betrayal. One evening, as spring finally started to soften the bitter winter air, Vanessa came over with a bag of baby clothes she'd picked up. Second-hand, tiny socks, tiny hats, each one softer than anything I owned. We sat together on the porch, folding them into neat little piles, the sky bleeding orange and pink above us. She smiled a real smile, tired but strong. "I'm going to be okay," she said. "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed her. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were healing. The months that followed weren't perfect. Healing never happens in a straight line. It's more like a slow, stubborn tide washing in and pulling back inch by painful inch. Vanessa and Raphael moved into a small apartment about 3 miles from my house, close enough that I could visit, far enough that they could finally build something that was their own. It wasn't fancy, as 2 bedrooms. One tiny bathroom with cracked tiles, a kitchen that smelled faintly of old linoleum, no matter how much they scrubbed. But it was theirs. Raphael started working full-time at the bakery, helping me with deliveries and eventually learning the ropes behind the counter. He wasn't perfect at it. He still burned the croissants more often than not, but he showed up every morning with a stubborn grin and a willingness to learn that counted for more than he knew. Vanessa went back to school part-time, using a small scholarship she'd found through a women's centre Clara had helped her connect with. Some days she still struggled, old wounds don't close just because you've changed your address, but there was a steadiness in her now, a kind of quiet determination that no one, not even Judith Morgan, could steal from her anymore. One warm June evening, about 6 months after everything had blown apart, Vanessa gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Marigold, because she bloomed in the middle of all the ugliness. Vanessa whispered to me through tears as she cradled the tiny bundle against her chest. When I held Marigold for the first time, something inside me broke open. All the anger, the fear, the heartbreak. It didn't disappear, not really, but it softened. It made room for something else, something brighter. Freedom, strength, hope. There was a small celebration at the hospital. Just a few of us, Raphael, Clara, and a couple of close friends who had stood by Vanessa when the world didn't make sense anymore. No grand family gatherings, no big declarations, just a circle of people who had chosen each other, who had fought for each other when it mattered. Judith wasn't invited. She didn't call, she didn't send a card, and somehow that hurt less than I thought it would. Her silence wasn't a wound anymore, it was just a fact, like rain or the changing seasons. Something you accept and move past. Life moved on, as it always does. Some nights when the bakery was quiet and the scent of fresh bread hung heavy in the air, I would sit on the front steps and watch the lights flicker on across town. I thought about everything we had lost, about everything we had gained, and I realised something simple but powerful. Family isn't who raises you, it's who stands with you when everything else falls apart. Vanessa stood taller now. Raphael laughed more easily. Marigold grew fat and strong, a little sunbeam with a laugh that could break your heart wide open. They had built a home out of broken pieces, and somehow it was more beautiful for all the cracks. As for me, I stopped waiting for apologies that were never going to come. I stopped mourning the family I wished I'd had. I started living the life I had fought so hard to protect. Sometimes people would ask politely, carefully, if I ever spoke to my mother anymore. I would just smile, soft and sad. No, I would say, and I'm finally okay with that. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't something you give to the person who hurt you. It's something you give yourself so you can stop carrying the weight of their choices on your back. On Marigold's first birthday, we had a party at the beach. Nothing fancy, just homemade sandwiches, a handful of balloons and the people who mattered. The sun was setting when Vanessa handed me a slice of cake and said, "We couldn't have done this without you." I looked around at Raphael chasing Marigold, across the sand, at Clara laughing with a neighbour, at the way the sky turned gold at the edges, like it was blessing the whole messy, beautiful scene, and I realised something I hadn't saved them. We had saved each other. One battered, broken piece at a time, and maybe, just maybe that was enough. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the ones who were supposed to love us most. But, as Evelyn's story reminds us, healing isn't about changing the past. It's about choosing a different future. Walking away from a toxic family isn't weakness. It's strength, it's survival, and it's an act of love for yourself, for the people you choose to build a life with, for the generations who come after you. No one should ever feel trapped by blood ties that only bring pain. Family isn't just who shares your name. Family is who shows up with open arms and open hearts. It's never too late to protect your peace, to find your voice, and to live with dignity and hope. Have you ever had to step away from people you loved to find your true peace? We would love to hear your story in the comments. Your courage might just inspire someone who needs it today. If Evelyn's journey touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who might need a little light, and subscribe for more real stories of resilience, freedom, and new beginnings. Your voice matters here. You are never alone.